now, the climate is really ugly for especially trans women in the United States. We were seen as a politically expedient target. And, I understand that like for a lot of people that they don't know trans people, and they found those little wedge issues, the sports and bathrooms and it pushes people's buttons in a way like, oh, gross, there's going to be a big burly man beating up my little daughter out there in softball or sex offender and peeing next to me. Like it pushes in some deep fear and disgust that people have towards trans people, especially trans women. The fallout is it's a much more dangerous place to be in the United States for people. And that's really, really sad. It's me to recognize my native country.
Yeah.
So from that sense, in Denmark, culturally, it's much better to be here as a trans woman. I mean, this is part of the reason I agreed to do on your podcast. If you know someone that's trans, you realize that these aren't these monsters under the bed. These are your neighbors. These are your colleagues. These are your friends. It's much harder to demonize someone that you know. And, by sharing this, like you recognize that, that I've done this not because I'm a monster, I wanted to cheat at sports or go into women's spaces. It's because I am a woman, and it just was something I was compelled to do. It wasn't a choice in a way, but I'm also much happier in my life after this. Like through my transition, it's really like I felt like I've removed a shell that was holding me in for a long time.
Welcome to this episode of the Decoding Diaspora Podcast, a podcast in which we talk about the aspirations and everyday challenges of migrants, expats, internationals, the diaspora, and how they find the resilience to overcome them. People migrate for all manner of reasons, sometimes voluntarily, sometimes involuntarily. And if it is voluntarily, we usually migrate because we are looking to better our lives, for better economic opportunities, to go and pursue higher education. Sometimes we migrate for love, and so the reasons are umpteen. And having migrated and come to a new country, we adopt to that new place and have an adopted land. And we find sometimes that this new place is actually affording us the freedom, the space, the opportunity to truly be ourselves. This freedom may or may not have been available to us in our countries of origin. I can say that for myself as a woman, as an Indian woman who moved to Denmark and has had a completely different lifestyle and a sense of freedom. Well, our guest today, her journey is a little similar, a little different as well. I knew our guest when they identified themselves as Jay Sterling. And then when they came to Denmark, after many years of living here, they went through their own internal journey and of seeking a new gender identity and took on a gender transitioning journey. Today, my guest is Allison Jay Sterling. Allison has been a dear friend and also an ex-colleague. As we celebrate and observe Pride Month in June, I have taken the opportunity of being in conversation with Allison to hear how this gender transitioning and sex change journey that she has chosen so bravely to undertake has panned out for her in her adopted country of Denmark. I know nothing about this subject. I know what I read in the papers, but today is an opportunity for me to sit down with a dear friend and learn from her. My language, my choice of words may be off, but I take this as an opportunity to learn and share and also really take a close look as to what it is, how does it feel to be a migrant and to have a whole new life, a different kind of life in your new adopted country, and what role Denmark, her adopted country, played in this journey for her. So can't wait to get started. A very warm welcome to you, Allison.
Thanks, Surabhi. It's really nice to be here.
Allison, you look absolutely splendid. This is your new avatar. You had a very sweet, affectionate smile and persona, even when I knew you in your previous avatar. But I must say, being a woman suits you.
Oh, thank you. You too.
So For the benefit of our audiences, Allison, let's set the stage and share with our audiences where are you originally from and what brought you to Denmark?
Sure. So I'm originally from the United States. I grew up in Colorado, and I moved to Denmark in 2010, so 15 years ago, because I got a job here. The longer story is that I finished my PhD during the Great Recession in
Yes.
2009. I was applying for jobs everywhere. I just expanded my search wider and wider, and had some opportunities in Europe, and I chose to come to Denmark.
Wonderful. So you would say it was rather coincidental that, you had ever aspired to be in Denmark?
No, I didn't. I wasn't aspiring to moving to Denmark specifically. I had, or even Europe. I had never even been to Europe at that point. So I was just looking for jobs and work that I could do that I can contribute in a meaningful way. When I started applying to jobs in Europe, I got 3 offers, and I had to make a choice between moving between Denmark, France, or Austria, and I chose Denmark.
Wonderful. And I have known you pretty much this entire time through your initial years, which has been lovely. We've had many fun experiences working and socializing together. But in recent times, Allison, we lost touch. And then at some point, I discovered that you had introduced yourself to the world with a new name and also with a new gender identity. Please feel free to correct me and my language at any point if it is not accurate.
That's perfect.
When did you decide to undergo sex change? How did that come about? And how long ago, how did you arrive at this decision?
Okay. So just would maybe this be a good point to talk about the words. I think sex change is usually understood to be genital surgery, and that's not something I've undergone yet, and that's also something that's very private. So it'd be more of a gender transition would be probably the term to describe the experience that I've had. And it's always there was never a day I woke up and said, I'm going to go through a gender transition. It started little bits at a time, and there was a long exploration period. There was a period, I think there was a point in 2022 where I came to accept that, yes, I'm a transgender woman, and this feels like who I am, and I'm going to go through medical transition. Can I add a little more on that? I think
yes, sure, please.
The reason why that question's hard to answer is that there are components to a transition. There's the social aspect, there's the psychological aspect, there's the legal aspect, and then there's what we tend to think of, or at least in the general population, when you say someone goes through a transition, is the medical part.
Yeah. And please take us through the various aspects and how they played out for you, socially, culturally, legally. How straightforward or complicated was that period of transitioning? And I'm sure that transition phase can be broken down into various sub phases as well. To the best of your memory, please take us through that.
Well, I guess where to start.
Socially, when you shared it, when you made peace with or came to the realization that, I think gender transitioning would be something that I am ready for and I should undertake. Let's start with socially. How did people respond to?
Well, I think socially, okay, let's maybe say that there are, there's the gender identity, but there's also gender expression. So there's a lot of things going on internally, maybe psychologically, maybe a better place to start in that sense, but internally that maybe an outside observer wouldn't necessarily know.
Exactly.
I think maybe you've known me for a while and you might have recognized that I was a little bit of a feminine man in a lot of ways before I transitioned. But that is something that has been with me my whole life. And there were things, in retrospect, looking back, that I had this thing in me, and then it just was something I could no longer bury. So socially, I started presenting myself a little bit more, say, blurred, I would say, perhaps queer in that sense, that I would maybe wear a little bit of makeup or wear clothing that was not necessarily masculine or feminine. And then I would start wearing a little bit more feminine. And there were times I would dress as a woman and go out in public that way. I was really nervous about that at first, of course. I think common experience.
Mm.
Of course, I was doing it for parties and stuff, for costume party. Then
Yeah.
then it's in an ironic sense, but it wasn't all that ironic for me. And that way, that's easier. But like to go out just for a walk in the park was a pretty big step for me.
Yeah.
And then I started going out to pubs and stuff that way. Just I think I put a lot of effort into my appearance, at the very start, and I felt pretty, and like I really wanted to leave the apartment, and well, I'll just walk down to the local corner bar and see
Yeah. And in these moments, even though there was a sense of trepidation,
yeah.
because perhaps there was a sense of judgment from the world around you, but I also want to ask how it felt for you. Did it feel liberating to express yourself as a woman in the way you dressed?
Yeah, I think it was more of a compulsion in a way. Like I felt liberated, I suppose, eventually, but more like I didn't understand why I was doing this, and it was. But it felt liberating at home to put on women's clothing, and I think when Corona happened, we were all locked in our places. I was very comfortable to be at home.
Yeah.
What I wanted to wear, but then I think. The society here, they don't care, like in general. Like I think Danish society has a ethic of minding their own business, and that's what I would do too. If I had seen someone who was wearing non-gender conforming clothing or something like that, I wouldn't, it's none of my business, and I wouldn't think much about it, really. But it was myself, I was very self-conscious. And I think that's because it's much more an internal process, say, transphobia that I had baked into myself through the society I grew up in.
And I totally get it, because I feel this aspect of being, nobody cares. I almost feel invisible. Literally nobody cares. Everybody minds their own business. Has been truly liberating for me as an Indian woman.
Yeah.
Because there's nobody regulating my behavior or conduct in a place like Denmark. But you said that this was in sharp contrast to where you grew up, and you had imbibed some kind of transphobia yourself.
Yeah, and I think I should make that clear that it was also the time I grew up.
Yes.
Attitudes where I'm from have changed a lot in the last couple of decades. We were for a while known as the hate state because of an amendment to the state constitution that this was in the 90s, they made a law in Colorado that they could make no laws that would protect people's status against discrimination because of their LGBTQ identities.
Yeah.
That was eventually thrown out as unconstitutional, but now Colorado is one of the more progressive states in that area. So nevertheless,
what has happened since?
Carried some of that baggage.
Yeah.
I want to touch on something you said, though, that was really interesting, the invisibility aspect.
Yes. I felt invisible. And I take it as a boon of living here.
Yeah, I think I felt much more visible when I first was starting to present myself as a woman in public. And that's just my experience of living as a man in public, where I felt invisible or anonymous, perhaps, would be
more appropriate. Yes.
Yeah, I became very much more self-aware of where I was. Like, it was late, I was at a train station, I was alone. I was very much more aware of the other people around me, if they were going to be a threat. That was new to me because living as a man, there was threats, of course, but not in the same way. And I was very much conscious of that. And I think that was a new experience for me. I mean, I've always been very aware of the difference between men and women and how they exist in society and the threats they experience. But if experience it firsthand is another level. And
Indeed.
And I don't know what it's like to be a woman in India and be policed that way.
No, of course. But did you feel that any sense of insecurity was tied to your identity as a woman or as a trans woman? And being trans, perhaps, I'm asking, made you more vulnerable or created a sense of greater vulnerability?
I think it's a little of both. And now, since I've been a few years in physical transition, I think in the in the superficial sense or the casual sense, I think I just kind of pass as I don't think people necessarily know that I'm trans unless they're interacting with me more personally.
Yeah.
At the start, yeah, it was both of those things.
And in this transition phase, you once mentioned that you went through a period in time where you were gender fluid.
Yeah.
What was that phase like at work and socially? And what role throughout this conversation, I would want you to reflect on what role being in Denmark, which is your adopted country, how it enabled or not your journey. So what was that gender fluid point in time like?
Yeah. Okay. That was so let's pick up on the story where during Corona I started presenting myself at home just as in the comfort and safety of my own home and feminine clothing, and then I started to go out in public that way. When we came back to work in the office and back to social life, I back into male clothing, and it was.
So you came back to work life after Corona in male clothing, as people knew you.
Yep.
Right.
But that was the time I started to blur the lines a little bit and wear things more neutral or androgynous. Then it was a lot of soul searching. I didn't understand what was going on with me, and it was really terrifying, honestly.
Yeah.
I wanted it to go away. And I think this is something, I just think this is something that a lot of trans people go through. I don't think most people no one really chooses to be trans. No one really wants to be trans. It's terrifying. It's going to upend your whole world. I didn't know anything necessarily about how to be a woman or what would happen to my relationships, my work.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, there was something inside me that needed out. I was compelled. There were certain days where I cannot go out that front door of my place wearing these male clothes. I do not want to go out there presenting myself that way. I think it would be the similar or the analog would be like how would a cis person, someone who's not trans, feel like going out and being forced to go out in clothing that was cross-gendered, it would feel so awkward. And that's where I went into. And so I started presenting myself as female on some days. And I came out to my course, the class I was teaching in the evening. I had a class I was teaching an evening class, and I came out to them first. We were talking about gender actually that day. And it went really well. Of course they're younger and they were used to this type of thing, and fine. With work, I was some days presenting myself female, others. I think the big event was the Eula Focus, the Christmas lunch. And I came in a dress, and I think I surprised some people because I hadn't been that feminine yet. I had been wearing things neutral perhaps, but then I came in with makeup and my nails done. And in some ways I feel that was one of my coming out events. I hadn't decided I was trans yet. I think I decided that I believed at the point that at that time that I was gender fluid, which is a valid identity. Some people experience this gender flux of being male and female, but at different times. And I think that was a pretty good description of what I was going through. Some days I was more comfortable wearing men's clothing, and other days And I think at the time, I see it now in retrospect as a way to kind of bargain with myself. I was not prepared to accept yet that I was a transgender woman. And instead, well, okay, I will tiptoe into this. I can be a woman some days, and that's fine, but I don't have to commit. I can still go back to being a man. And so there was a period at that time where I think I confused a lot of people socially. Yeah.
That moment when you let's say the big reveal happened at the Christmas lunch, what was the immediate response or reactions from people around you?
Yeah.
Was it positive? Was it tentative? Did anybody say, hey, you're doing this for attention? I'm just speculating. How did that pan out?
Well, it was actually that Christmas lunch was pretty poorly attended in 2020. December 2020. And I think we were just coming out of a lockdown or going back into, I can't remember exactly, but there were a lot of people concerned about Corona either way. And so there were not very many people at that event. I think I was met with a lot of acceptance. I think people who knew me closely already had seen this progression. Others were a little bit surprised. And I remember one person, well, you're very pretty. Okay, thanks. But I guess it was kind of a blur because I was mostly buzzing in my own head with this.
Yes.
In the weeks and months that followed, I think there was a lot of confusion at work about what's going on with you. They wanted kind of an answer, something definite.
Right.
Are you transitioning? And I
But
wasn't.
did somebody bluntly ever ask, are you transitioning? What is your pronoun? Were you confronted with that in that phase of time?
Yeah, so project partners, I think in a respectful way, I had some, which pronouns do you prefer? And I said either are fine.
Okay.
That's what I had said before.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it doesn't work very well. Someone has indefinite pronouns. But no, at work, there were people that, during lunch, like, what's going on? Are you transitioning? Or there was whispers in the corridor. I just, sensed. I felt like I didn't know how to navigate that, honestly. It is in the Danish culture that we kind of mind our own business. And I also I wasn't ready to announce it to the world what my identity is. I hadn't really settled it myself. And this was an exploration period. I identified as fluid, but that doesn't really mean a lot necessarily to most people.
Yes.
That was obvious, right? And I guess, I also just felt like, well, it's not work's business. And I was a little bit wrong about that. It's none of their business is kind of what I told myself. I need to sort it out for myself. Yeah, I did talk to our HR person eventually because there was issues about work travel. And then I think there were some people who were concerned about the reputation we would have on our projects. Which I think is a little bit unfounded, which ended up being very much unfounded. They were
take us through that.
Yeah, like they were worried about how I would be representing the office as presenting themselves in female clothing, but who had obviously been born as a male. So I think it's like a displaced prejudice in a sense. Like they're not prejudiced, but they're worried other people would be.
Right.
And they were afraid that like, oh, this might ruin our reputation.
Yes. And were they correct or were they off?
No.
It was unfounded, you say.
Unfounded. Our external partners, especially in the main projects I was working on, were a lot of them were queer themselves, not necessarily trans, but they were,
quite,
flag. But also, even if they weren't, they saw me as much more vibrant and authentic and lively. It didn't matter to them and now I think they just see me as a woman and it's not an issue. There is still some concern about travel safety. That's just a larger issue with the world as it is.
Yes.
But yeah, that's difficult to navigate, because there's only so much we can do as in our office, and it's hard to articulate those things like, well, it's okay for this person to travel and this person's not, and where does that slippery slope lead? Because then are we saying, well, then it's maybe not safe for women to travel, or it's not safe for racial minorities or people with disabilities?
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily a path we want to go down. I think it needs to be to the individual, the location, the trip, the circumstances, and you make an assessment there rather than a blanket rule about.
Yes. Now you are touching upon the practicalities of this, gender fluid phase where you were exploring yourself. What is my gender identity? And you were not entirely ready to commit to your female identity just yet. You were in a phase of exploration. And quite understandably, the people around you, the world that you interacted with, were also transitioning with you to figure out how to relate to you. Now, you touched upon some practical aspects, and with that comes some legal aspects also. Now, when you say there were issues of, how you're perceived when you're working in a project and with travel and the safety concerns, at what point did you have to change your name legally? Did you have to get a new passport? At what point, and what makes you a woman legally? Is it your passport? Is it your name change? How was that handled, and how much later did that happen?
Okay, yeah, those are good questions. I want to touch on something you said just now about that people in my life also needed to transition. And I think
Yeah.
that's a really beautiful point, very wise. It was something I wish I had recognized earlier also, but it is so much the case that
Yes.
all of my relationships also had to go through a transition with my family, friends, my
Yeah.
coworkers.
Yes.
And some of those transitions have been difficult and some didn't happen. So those people are no longer in my life. And that's
Yeah.
just the reality of it.
That's a very big aspect of, it's, do you feel like that's a big price to pay? How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I think it's sad, of course, but yeah, I think that it was a fear of mine, and I had also some relatives and friends who were they've reached out to me, at an early stage of transition or questioning and have this concern, will I lose family and friends? And the sad truth is yes, you probably will. But then on the other hand, the ones you have or your relationships are going to be much more authentic and deep and honest. And I guess I came to the conclusion is I would rather be loved for who I am, or rather be hated for who I am than loved for who I'm not. I should put it that way.
Sure.
I could no longer just be wearing a mask and maintaining a relationship that was not honest anymore. And that's the reality of it. And so some people make that transition, and that's and
also I feel that, when we decide to pursue any path, whether it's any other dimension of life, there will be people who are not on board with that choice making because it doesn't vibe with them, sit well with them. They have other leanings. And I mean, a very simple aspect of, the choice of partner you marry. Coming from the country I do, it evokes a lot of ardent emotions, and a lot of times families don't support your choice of spouse, something as fundamental as that. And we have that choice to make that, thank you for being part of my journey so far, but I got to do what I got to do.
yeah.
And pursue what is in my heart. And so, yes, I think there should be people who cannot embrace your life choice should be allowed to be themselves and be at peace. And so our paths just, part in that sense.
Yeah.
And I feel like everybody we serve each other in various ways and at different points in time. And maybe their role had finished. Yeah, but going back to, and you felt, did you feel?
Put it by the way. I really like that. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Yes, also that. But now that we are talking about relationships that you lost, let's stick with that before we go back to the legal question.
Yeah.
What emotional toll did it take on you, if any? And did you have any support systems to navigate the turbulence that I'm imagining it may have caused, these shifting of relationship equations in your life?
Yeah, and this is actually linking back to the theme of your project here. I think me being a foreigner and someone who moved to Denmark and established a life here, and I had my own family of friends in that sense.
Yes,
I felt like I had an enormous amount of support here from them, and they were very accepting, and it wasn't even necessarily an issue. And when I fast forward a little bit, at the end of my gender fluid era, where I've come to accept I'm trans, I had a birthday party, and I basically was my coming out party. I didn't announce it, but I changed my name, and I made the theme homecoming, which is like this dance that happens in United States high schools at the beginning of the year. It's very awkward. Like everybody is like trying to figure out who they are, and it was like thematic, metaphorical for me, like me coming back home. And I wanted that experience of like going to that dance like in the way I hadn't gotten before. So I had hair done, how the dress, different nails, and I wanted to be homecoming queen. So, and then my friends, it was beautiful. And I think at that point, like I just kind of came to that acceptance. I'm a transgender woman, and to have that like outpouring of support and love from my friends, it was a wonderful moment for me, and I'm so grateful for it. And I'm so grateful for
So
Here.
wonderful, so adorable also, and a beautiful thing. But this support, did it help peel away any challenging dynamics as well?
I think the harder ones are people back in the United States and
Mm.
some members. And of course, me being here in Denmark, it's that relationship is we don't see each other much, and they've missed out on steps, and all of a sudden it seems like poof, I've transformed into some
Yeah,
woman they
yeah,
don't know. And I recognize in a lot of ways it's that they have a relationship with me, but it's a past version of me that they're still clinging
yes,
to.
yes,
It's sad, but it's just the reality. And like you said, there can be other circumstances in other people's lives that aren't transgender, where they
yeah,
experience something very similar. And
absolutely. And I see the key import of this point is really people are clinging to previous versions of ourselves. And we are all evolving individuals, and not everybody has kept pace. I think that is such an insightful take on a migrant's life as well. Because we have moved away, we have had a variety of new experiences, we have become new people, but not everybody may have kept pace with that storyline.
right. And you know what? It happens on the reverse way also. When I go back
Yeah.
to the
Yes, we
I'm
haven't kept pace.
no
Yes.
expecting
Yeah.
to be like it was when I left 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Like, what happened to this place? And
Exactly. Yeah.
um,
And so we are a little out of touch with the two realities are out of touch with the
mhm.
other. Have you been back after your transitioning?
Yeah, I was back just recently actually for my brother's wedding.
Yes.
Yeah, I was very nervous about traveling there given the current political
So
climate.
you went in 2025
Yeah, it
after
was
the change of American administration?
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
mhm. Yeah,
Okay.
last
And then since we haven't already touched upon it, you being an American woman in Denmark, you are actually also Danish. You have both American and Danish citizenship.
right.
And you are situated here in Denmark, in Copenhagen, and you are seeing this new reality play out in the States with the with the coming in of the new administration. And one of the first things that was mentioned at the swearing in was that there will be only two genders,
Yeah.
and there will be no space for any other identity.
hmm
I was shell shocked and deeply affected that day. I
Yeah.
want to know how you dealt with that.
Yeah, I guess I wasn't surprised because they announced that, and there was also this that was made very clear, black and white, in their Heritage Foundation's plans for this administration, the Project 25. Yeah, so now this may be a good point to get to the legal aspect. I had changed my name in Denmark legally and
Yeah.
also my identification number because in Denmark
PPR numbers,
yeah,
national identity numbers.
they're gendered. So odd number means you're male and an even number means you're female, which has led to some kind of funny like things. I mean, I'm glad I did this. Also, in Denmark, there's a list of names that are allowed for women and a list of names
Yeah.
that are, and also a list of names that are neutral.
Yes.
Jay,
And so just for the uninitiated, the state has a say in pretty much every aspect of your life, including the names that you may or may not carry. So the Danish state, the state is all in mighty in many ways.
yeah, yeah. I guess it's just who is one thing to kind of protect the culture of names, but they also just don't want someone naming their child something inappropriate, I suppose. I don't know.
Yeah.
Jay,
But so what happened? I tied to how you felt with the new legislation coming in, if
Yeah.
that evoked any strong emotions, plus the fact that you had gone through a name change, a legal name change in Denmark, and how that process panned out.
Right. Well, okay. So the emotions I felt when that happened were, of course, I was outraged and saddened, and also a little bit relieved because I had done this process right before the administration
Yes.
changed.
Yes.
But also very uncertain because now I had a passport. It had my correct name.
American passport.
I changed my American passport also. That has my correct name and correct
Okay.
gender on it. amend it. And I was uncertain whether it would still be valid. And
Right. Yes, of course.
I think it's just one of the things I've realized becoming like a legal aspect of going through this is that our identities and are really just entries on a spreadsheet somewhere on a computer. And when that's gone, like you don't exist in the society. And that I became very aware of that in this process.
Yeah.
So my passport is still valid. I was able to travel, but I was very nervous about it,
Yes.
obviously.
And nothing untoward happened?
No, it was fine. And I'm very grateful for that. But I'm also, it was that event I felt was very important as my brother's wedding. Our family was coming together. I felt like it was essential. I also had bought the tickets before the change of administration. And
Right. That's great.
yeah.
Definitely a sense of relief on that front then.
Yeah, but as you intend to travel to the US under this administration again, because it's just not a good time.
So you don't intend to travel back to the US right now in the near future? No. Wow, those are big life decisions impacting a lot of people. And interestingly, because you have a Danish citizenship as well, I would say, have a fallback option that many people might not have.
Yeah.
And you have the security and protections of another government.
Mm-hmm.
And so take us through that process of, okay, now I have arrived at the decision that I identify as a woman. Did the name change process take a long time in Denmark?
So this is where I was a little bit confused about this because, like I was saying, that there's the list of names and that are allowed for each. And I thought I needed to change my CPR number first.
Right.
Before I change my name.
Yeah.
And the process takes 6 months. You need to write to the administration and say, I'd like to change my CPR number because my gender identity is now this. And then you need to remember 6 months later to write them again, like I wrote you 6 months ago. Yes, I want to do this. They want to give you a 6 month, what they call it,
reconsidering period.
Yeah, think about it.
Think about it, yeah.
So that went through, but the name change is actually handled through the church, and you can change your name without changing your CPR if you fill out a different form. So I did that. I had to pay a little bit of money for a new yellow card, the CPR card. It was a little bit of a tricky thing because I was dropping my my surname, my original surname, and replacing it with my past middle name, which is now my surname, Sterling.
Yeah.
And they are very restrictive in Denmark about changing your surname.
Okay.
Yeah, that's especially if you want to be Jensen or Hansen, that's fine.
Yeah.
You can. But if it's fewer than 2,000 people in the country that have that name, it's so-called a protected name, and you need a signature from everybody living in the country with that last name, which I was not prepared to do.
Yeah.
But since it was my middle name, there's a debate I had with the church on this. It's like, was it my middle name or my second first name? I had to produce my birth certificate to prove that Sterling was my middle name, and now I want to make it my last name, and that's legal. So I was very nervous for a week or two that I wasn't going to get the name that's my name.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be Jensen. There's nothing wrong with Jensen, but it's not my name.
Yeah.
So, so when I had all that in place, and this is the nice thing about Denmark, is that it's very efficient. It was changed across all government agencies. All my records were immediately updated, all my medical records. I was now, this is also funny, according to the healthcare, system, I was now a woman, so all my blood tests and all should be within a different parameter range.
Oh, yes. Wow, what a fascinating aspect. As a woman, your test results should follow in different brackets.
Yes.
Reference points had changed.
Yeah, and I got a reminder to get my pap smear cervical cancer test, which I didn't need. But I did also get a reminder for a breast exam, so I did do that because that is something that was relevant. I'm in a weird area, I will admit, in that sense. So
take us also. How long did it? Sorry.
So once I did all that, I applied for a new passport and driver's license and all
In Denmark first, and then in the US.
Yeah, in Denmark first, it was that's the way I need to do it because I'm residing here. And then once I had all of it taken care of in Denmark, then I started with the US, but it was a pretty straightforward process at that point because I had already gone through the legal process in Denmark, and the US recognizes the Danish courts for that. So it was
And
fine.
what did you do did you just go to the American embassy to
Right.
undertake that process? Right. And once you had sorry?
No, it's a little more complicated in the US, and that's specific to the US because it's not as efficient as Denmark. I had to go
Right.
change multiple times with different agencies and at the state level. And I was also able to get a new birth certificate. So all those were separate steps that took, in Denmark, it took 6 months to get my name changed, 7 months. And then the passport stuff was within another month. It took another year, perhaps, to change all my legal information in the US.
So just for the benefit of our audiences, 6 months to change your name, which was handled by the church in Denmark. Then at what point was the CPR number changed?
So 6 months to change my CPR number. That's
Okay.
by I forgot which institute it was off the top of my head.
Right.
And then the church, that went pretty quick. That was like a few weeks to a month. And that's only because we were having a disagreement about my name.
Yes.
That's usually pretty quick.
So the name change came in first, and then the CPR number change in came as well.
The other order, a
Okay.
CPR first and then my name change. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, because I thought I needed to do it that way. It turns out you don't. I have friends that just changed their name through the church and left their CPR number alone.
That is the gray area, right? Because then they will be in this records dealt with male parameters for their blood tests, even though they may carry a female name, right?
Yeah, I think and I think some people who've done that just they didn't care so much about if the state saw them as a male or female, or didn't care what their gender marker was on their passport. For me, it really mattered. Also, there's some people who identify as non-binary. There's maybe not a good option in Denmark, so they just didn't bother with it. For me, it was actually an issue because I don't appear male, at least I hope not anymore. My passport says male. It's very difficult for me to travel in a lot of places if my gender marker doesn't match my appearance.
Right.
To do that, I need to change my CPR.
Yes. So your occupational demands also had a little bit bearing on getting the documentation to be more consistent with who you appear and would like to be.
Yeah.
And in order to do, again, for the benefit of our viewers, if somebody wants to take the path that you took, as an American, you had to go to different authorities to get the whole thing, effectuated in different parameters. But still, did you do it online sitting in Denmark, or did you visit different offices or did you every time have to go to the embassy?
So the embassy handles some things. Then there's the embassy in Oslo, which handles things for the U.S., the Social Security Administration. So that's like our CPR. In the U.S., we have the SS number. That cannot be handled here in Copenhagen. That had to go through, but it was processed through the Copenhagen embassy and sent to Oslo and sent back to me. But then the things that deal with my state, I did send those through post. And that is different on a state-to-state level. In many states, not change your gender anymore. It's only a few states remaining, and Colorado being one of them, where you can get a new amended birth certificate. So I'm very fortunate that I happen to be born in Colorado, and I'm very proud of that, honestly.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it's not possible for many, many people from the United States to get those changed.
Incredible. I'm happy that it has all panned out for you. And I mean, even though there were the bureaucratic steps that need to be taken, there were no major roadblocks to this legal change.
Yeah, and I should also say, even in Denmark, it's really recent that I would have been able to change my gender.
Right.
I think they, until recently, used to require genital surgery before you can do that. And many countries are still that way. But that process is very long in Denmark. It could take over So, um,
Yes.
yeah, and that's
So
relatively recent, certainly within the last decade. I can't remember the year that it was made.
that is possible for you without undergoing a sex change
Yeah,
surgery or therapy. Now, that brings me to the very big aspect of our conversation that I really wanted to learn more about from you. You underwent gender transitioning in Denmark. How has it been to do this process, this journey, with respect to the Danish healthcare system? And
yeah.
I ask this as I would ask anyone going through, let's say, pregnancy. How was your pregnancy experience and journey with the Danish healthcare system? Similarly, I ask, this is, after all, something bodily, anatomical concern. How did the Danish healthcare system, which is so looked up to and sought after for its protectionism and care, how did it work out for you?
Yeah, so first I should say I'm very grateful for the Danish healthcare system in general. I'm coming from a place in the US where I had no health coverage at all. So
Wow.
when I first
Wow.
came to Denmark, that was a huge deal for me, even though I
Yeah.
wasn't using it necessarily, but just
Yeah.
to, like, if I did break my wrist once, and I'm glad that I could go visit a doctor, or
Mm.
if I had a concern, I could go see a doctor.
Yeah.
Something that was not available to me in the US. And so the gender aspect, though, is the gender transition aspect is very strange, I would say, in Denmark and in all of Scandinavia. I think they use very similar models in Sweden and Norway.
Mm.
And even in Finland, I believe it's also
Mm.
very similar. So there is a separate office that handles gender transitioning, and it's the Center for Gender Identity, or Center for Kunstig in Danish.
Yeah.
And
Right.
there are 3 offices in the country. There's one in Copenhagen, there's one in Odense and Fyn, and there's one in Aalborg and Jutland. And the one in Copenhagen, unfortunately, has sort of the worst reputation among trans people, right?
Why is that?
I think it's because they have a higher rejection rate. There are certain people on the staff there that are, say, somewhat antagonistic towards people who transition. And it's, and also, like, why do reputations happen, right? Because things, and it's probably the most frequently visited. There's more stories about it. And yeah, that's the one where I went. I didn't have any problems. I think the process is, so I first had to go to my GP to get a referral and explain to my GP why I wanted a referral. And
So you knew that of the institute, and how did you learn of this institute that you should even ask for a referral to them?
yeah, that's a great question. That's the social part, because I think, we find each other, people. When I started transitioning or started exploring my gender, a lot of people reached out to me that I kind of casually knew that were in the kind of queer community, and I did also. I reached out, like, I'm confused, what's going on with me? I have a friend, I know someone, oh yeah, she's a trans woman. Let me invite her over for dinner so we can just talk. I just want to hear her. Like, and I was asking her the same things you're asking me, maybe from a more personal level, because I was trying to figure out what was going on with me.
Yeah.
That's where we learn about the process of going through the Danish healthcare system. So, right, I went to the doctor, got the referral. It takes then between 6 months and a year before you're actually seen by the Center for Gender Identity.
Right.
And you have a series of meetings, like it's separated by a few months. It takes anywhere between 6 months and a year to go through that process. I think it took me 6 months. I was really lucky to go through. So it was a year from when I went to the doctor first for the referral to when I was prescribed a hormone replacement therapy.
Okay.
And in that process, I have many meetings with, they were kind of, I guess they were psychological in nature. They asked me a lot of questions about my life. I thought it was very strange, honestly. They are using, in a lot of ways, somewhat outdated ideas about what it means to be transgender, and very, I say, maybe outdated ideas about gender roles themselves.
Right.
They're not in line with the WPATH. That's the World Professional Association of Transgender Health. Global WPATH produces a guide I think on the 8th version now. is the best practice for transgender health. And this office doesn't necessarily follow that so closely. So I guess I have my critiques about it.
So
And
what questions did they ask you about your personal life?
I mean, they were really focused on my early childhood, and that's
Right.
difficult for me to remember. I do remember questioning it back then, but our memories from when we were 4 years old are I would say a little,
Sketchy, blurry.
yeah, they've been revisited and rewritten many, many times.
Yes.
My experience when I first hit puberty and how I felt about it, and focused a lot on the bullying I received in school. And then they also they ask a lot of questions about my sex life, which was a little, that now all those things are part of my permanent medical record.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Really, those aren't all that relevant, honestly, because by the time I had gone to get the referral, I had already gone through all the psychological work. I had gone through being gender fluid. I had socially come out, and in the process of being evaluated, I had a surgery to reduce the size of my Adam's apple. I had hair removal. I had done all these processes already privately.
Yeah, but tell me, did you do it in anticipation that they may question question my intent, or did you get guidance from your peer group, your social network? Were you self-motivated that, look, I don't want my Adam's apple. It's not something I want on me anymore. What were the elements that guided you to take these steps?
That's a good question, and actually that'd be a really strong critique of the process itself, that it might force people to end up in a situation where they're trying to prove and go above and beyond to prove that they are who they say they are. And maybe that wasn't the case for me. I had done these things even before I got, a lot of the laser hair removal I started even before I recognized I was trans. I just, for some reason, I don't want hair.
Yeah. It was a personal choice for your own.
Yeah. Exactly. And the surgery was, that was because I hated having an Adam's apple. I've always hated having an Adam's apple. Even identifying as a male, I never liked it. It was, and I was nervous about the surgery. It was expensive. It was done in Spain, so I had to travel for that. Of course, like, I recognize why I did it now in the context of my gender transition, but it wasn't to impress the medical
or meet any criteria.
No, but that is an interesting point, because I did feel like when I had these appointments with the Center for Gender Identity, I would get my hair done. I would find a dress to wear. I would get my nails done. Yeah. It's crazy for like someone going to a doctor's appointment. But I felt like so much was riding on it. Like I needed to go in there with my makeup on fleek, and I needed to like really rock it, because they decided that no, you don't really come across as a woman to me. Then I would have been denied healthcare, and that's a lot of pressure. They don't tell you need to do that, but like I felt it nonetheless. And that's a very.
And these are like subtle expectations that you sense would hold you in good stead. But remind me again and educate me. Yeah. What does this institute provide you in terms of healthcare? And why do you care to be in their good books?
Yeah, the main thing they provide is a prescription for hormone replacement therapy.
Right.
They also are the place to go if I wanted surgery through the state. I think the only thing they offer would be bottom surgery. But they also offered laser hair removal, but then I had already done that privately. Right. So there are some things, some healthcare that they cover, the state covers, if you hadn't already had it done. Right. That said, like the process for getting bottom surgery or, gender reassignment surgery is separate. After you've been approved for hormones, then you have to revisit them again. And that's another year or so of deep psychological evaluation. Then there's a waiting list of about a decade before you get surgery in Denmark for that thing. If I were to do that, I wouldn't do it here. Yeah.
Despite how reliable the healthcare system is?
I
mean, again, I don't mean to speak on your behalf. Would you consider it reliable? I consider it reliable if I'm sick or, with a regular sickness, but.
So that's a really good point. So yeah,
Yeah.
Denmark is a very reliable healthcare system for the common things.
Yeah.
Gender reassignment surgery or vaginoplasty or phalloplasty for trans men is a very specialized surgery, and there are very few surgeons who do this.
In Denmark or worldwide?
World.
Okay.
That to do it well in the world, there are very few people demanding that or asking for that. And then in Denmark, they didn't used to offer the surgery at all. They would actually, you would get it paid for by surgeons in Belgium, from what I understand. Now there is a surgeon here that does it. Let's just say they don't have the best reputation for this type of surgery.
Right. So, which is why you probably, if you ever were to reach that point in time and entertain that, you would seek it elsewhere.
Yeah, all the surgeries I've done privately, and I've paid for that myself.
Yeah.
The only thing I did for from the CKI, or the Center for Gender Identity, is the prescription for hormone therapy.
Prescription for hormone therapy.
Yeah.
Yes.
Technically, I could have done it on my own, and in a lot of ways, it's kind of what we're doing anyway. The trans population in Denmark, we only get a meeting with the endocrinologist once a year.
Right.
And that's much less frequent than the WPATH recommends. So, we're only...
How do you feel about that? That Denmark is actually not following the world recommended standards and guidelines on this. You were supposed to get such medical attention and assessment more than once a year, but you get once a year. And is there any activism or conversation around this in the community? Where do things stand right now?
Yeah, there is critiques. We're a small community, though.
Yeah.
And it's a very specialized service that Denmark's... I'm a little torn in a way. Like, I appreciate that there is a state-supported system. I appreciate that there are limited resources, and I understand that they need to allocate those resources to where the needs are, and we're a very small population. I totally understand. I wish in Denmark that there was a private option, but they've made that you have to go through the center. And I think where I feel it's a little unfair. And I also feel like, according to the WPATH, they recommend informed consent model. That I'm not talking about children here, but as an adult, they deem you of sound mind and healthy. They just tell you the risks, and it's your life. I am much more of that mind and mindset. But so that's maybe my American coming through, that like, it's your body and you should have autonomy. Yeah. But I think it's
autonomy to decide where you go and seek that medical assistance. But here they take away that option from you.
Autonomy to say, like, I want to transition.
Yeah, sure. But here they are questioning if you are absolutely genuine on this intent. So where is the gap?
Yeah. So what they're trying to do is establish whether or not you are suffering from gender dysphoria.
Right.
It's a replacement from the old gender identity disorder that was in the psychological guide. There's been an effort to depathologize LGBTQ identities, right? So gender dysphoria is a condition. It's not an illness. It's very real. I mean, it's something I did experience, like not being able to leave the home dressed as a male or feeling very uncomfortable. And so they need to establish that as a reason to prescribe medicine like hormone therapy, and that you don't want to prescribe medicine if there's nothing wrong with someone, right? And physiologically, I had a functional endocrine system running on testosterone. There was no reason to change it.
So this prescription is given to someone who is experiencing gender dysphoria and would not be prescribed otherwise.
Oh, you can get it. This person, but you'd have to have it in line with the endocrine system you have. So if I were like, if I went in to my doctor and said, I'm kind of sluggish and I have low libido, they would give me testosterone. Right. And if you went in as a woman and said, like, oh, maybe I'm, usually it's for perimenopausal women or menopausal women, like I'm getting hot flashes, I'm exhausted, I'm moody, you can get on the same medication that they give to trans people. It's different. So if you're trying to get the hormone that's opposite of what your endocrine system is, and you need to prove that you are, in fact, trans and you're suffering from a condition called gender dysphoria. Right. So it's,
then they will prescribe it to enable your gender transition. I get it.
yeah. And it's a tight rope to walk because you need to show that you're suffering,
Mm,
but you're still functional and
mm,
you're in a good place and you're well
mm,
supported. You have a good friend
mm,
network, you're
mm,
successful at work, but not,
mm,
you're still suffering. And because if you're suffering too much, they're going to send you, for psychological evaluations, and maybe you should be on anti-anxiety medication instead. Like
yeah.
it's a really,
It's a true tightrope to walk because I am miserable to some degree. I don't know if miserable is the right. I'm torn, I'm distraught, but I'm not completely dysfunctional in my state. So
yeah,
help me. But, you know, I'm not in need of psychological treatment in that sense.
exactly. And I don't envy their position because, especially if they're working with youth and it's much trickier, right? You might get people in there that are like, there are people that maybe want to just,
Yeah.
I don't know. They must see a lot that I wouldn't know. I'm trying to imagine. I do think it's a little strange to have so much gatekeeping for this, in my opinion,
Mm,
because hormone replacement therapy it's a very slow process. Like it changes,
mm,
it makes significant changes. I think that's really amazing thing about being human and that
mm,
our bodies know how. There are instructions in my DNA to make myself into a woman or a man.
mm.
It's the hormones that turn it on. That's
Incredible.
really fascinating to me.
Yeah.
It takes a long time, and
Yeah.
I think when someone starts on hormone therapy, even if they're cis, they'll know right away, is this right for me? Like I
Right.
felt, this feels much more like the me
Yeah.
I feel like my brain is running on the right fuel or something. Like I felt much more in tune with myself.
Correct.
And if I was
Mm,
wrong, I
mm.
would know that also. This makes me feel terrible. Yeah.
And is this prescription lasts a whole year because you're visiting only for a year? And the medicines, where do you pick it up? Your hormones in a regular pharmacy?
Yeah. I just go to the
Okay.
pharmacy.
Right.
Yeah. And
And this frequency of once a year, which is not as per recommended standards, you are okay with that setup? Has it met your needs?
well, like I said, the standards, I believe it's every 3 months for the first year, and then later on you can go once a year once you've figured out what everybody's body reacts differently. So
Right.
it takes a little bit of experimentation to
Yeah.
find a dose. And for me, I just did that on my own, and I think this is where I would have appreciated the little more guidance from an endocrinologist that we can experiment more.
Right.
One phone call after 3 months with a nurse,
Yeah.
and then my first meeting at 6 months, but it was like I think not even 15 minutes. It was like, how are you? Great. Okay, good. So I have kind of taken it on my own to experiment and find the dose that feels right for me. I've paid
Okay.
for my own blood tests. I've done my own research in a way. I've looked at a lot of things. Yes. And I think I've found something that seems to be working well. I'm very proactive in monitoring all my blood work and making sure things are that I'm healthy. I'm much more proactive about that than I've ever been in my life, and
Right.
because I want to make sure that I'm staying healthy, and yeah, and that's something I feel like I need to do. I need to take responsibility for that.
Yes. Could you have imagined stepping away from this whole process and looking back?
Hmm.
Could you have imagined going through this now, the exact journey that you've been through now in
Yeah.
Denmark? Do you think it was available and feasible for you back in the States?
Oh,
Your
yeah.
country of origin?
You don't know how many times I've asked myself that question, and
Yeah.
yeah, I think every trans person has a little bit of remorse in them, and that, like, I wish I had transitioned earlier. And I think that's one of the main psychological things we do struggle with. There's this grief of who was I before, and if I could have known that life could be this joyful. Uh, yeah, not that I regret my past life or I was miserable, but I certainly wasn't living as fully as I am now. And I do wonder about that.
But more than the timing of it
Yeah,
is
the
one
U.S.
thing is that would it even have been possible? Like, do you get this setup a setup that is enabling this journey.
Mhm.
Is it possible in the US? And what could it have been a reality for you, say, 15 years ago, had you not left?
Yes or no? Yes and no. I'd say like there was a
Mm.
point when I was 28 where I was a little bit like there was like I feel like there was a missed opportunity in some sense.
Right.
I went to a Halloween party dressed as a woman, and I put a
Yeah.
lot of into that costume, and my friends
Yeah.
were like, "You're putting a lot of effort into that costume." Like, oh, right.
Comes naturally to me. Feel good about it.
And yeah, look back at that. Would it have been possible? I mean, yes, there were trans people,
Mm.
and yes, there was a sort of a system in place in the US.
Mm.
However, I would not have had the social support that I do here now in this.
Mm.
I was not ready personally.
Mm.
I wouldn't have had the resources myself. Like
Mm.
transitioning unfortunately is very expensive.
Exactly about the resources, because if you went through, the surgery of Adam's apple removal and hair removal, it also occurred to me that that is also coming from a place of privilege.
Yeah, of course. And I recognize that that's a big discussion in the trans community of privilege.
Mm.
There's a lot of pushback against trans medicalism, or at least those who say, you're not really trans unless you've done these procedures. I am totally on the side of it. Like, you don't need to have medical procedures to be transgender. That
Right.
is a place of privilege. And it's a privilege I
Yeah.
recognize I have.
Yeah.
I have paid with my own money that I've got from working, but like,
Exactly.
I recognize the privilege I have by having this job and being able.
Exactly, which is what I tie to what your adopted country also offered you, the stability of an income and a career,
Yeah,
which translated into having this opportunity and privilege to pursue certain elements for transitioning.
yeah, I'm very, very grateful for that. I'm very lucky.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm also, I think when we talk about trans women, the danger to trans women, that it's trans women of color that are most, unfortunately, the ones that are more likely to be attacked and assaulted and killed. So I have the privilege of being white in that sense. Um,
yeah.
yeah,
So there are those layers and those
yeah,
intersections and dimensions.
yes, for sure.
But going back to what is possible or could have been possible, if at all, in the US, do you think society is and medically Danish society is more evolved to handle this than the US, or you don't have, or do you have any thoughts around this now that you are privy to two cultures, you are a national of two cultures, you traverse two lands, you've had your recent adult life panning out in Denmark, and you are a few steps away from the States.
Mhm.
As a transgender person, which society do you think is more enabling? And personally, where do you feel more at home?
Okay, well, that's a complicated question. So to do a comparison between a trans life in the United States versus Denmark, I think if we go back maybe 5 years, I think transition would have been easier in the US than in Denmark, because Denmark has this whole process of the CKI approval thing. In the US, it's an informed consent model. If you're an adult, you go in and you say, I'm interested in transitioning in hormone therapy. They give you the risks, you walk out with prescription. It's on you. There's private clinics in the US. Surgeons in the US are some of the world's best. So if you have resources, and it'd be a great place to do that.
Because of the private options.
Yeah,
Yes.
for the privileged.
And the privilege, because it's expensive. Yes.
Yes. However, now the climate is really ugly for especially trans women in the United States. I don't know what to say. We were seen as a politically expedient target, and I understand that, like, for a lot of people that they don't know trans people, and they found those little wedge issues, the sports and bathrooms, and it pushes people's buttons in a way, like, oh, gross, there's going to be a big burly man beating up my little daughter out there in softball, or sex offender and peeing next to me. Like, it pushes in some deep fear and disgust that people have towards trans people, especially trans women. The fallout is it's a much more dangerous place to be in the United States for trans people. And that's really, really sad. It's me to recognize my native country.
Yeah.
So from that sense, in Denmark, culturally, it's much better to be here as a trans woman. I'm comfortable just living my life here. People kind of mind their own business. There are those attitudes here, though, that those attitudes are very contagious. They've spread from the US to the UK, back and forth. They have taken root in a lot of right-wing politics. They've seen it as a strategy. It's seen as a way. I also want to make a big point here that trans women, particularly, they're the vanguard for human rights and bodily autonomy. It's seen, and it's something we need to talk about a lot at work too. It's seen as if we can chip away at their bodily autonomy, then we could start taking away women's rights and marriage equality. All these things are dominoes. We're in the forefront, and this strategy is like a divide and conquer, and so I really, from a feminist point of view, like, trans women are women, but trans women are on the front lines, especially trans women.
As a minority group, of course, in the front lines.
Yes, we're not the ones that are the sex offenders. We're not the ones violating you. We're at risk also. We're at more risk. And anyway, so I think Denmark is where I feel home. Of course, Denmark is my home. I'm glad to be here. I'm also very vigilant and concerned that those messages are starting to percolate into Denmark, into the discourse. Even people I knew pre-transition who are friends of mine were like, where are you getting this? Like, I see some posts on their social media, and it's just heartbreaking. And thinking,
oh my God, dear. These are people you know. These are people you have been friends with, who know you. But they are becoming more and more right-wing in their approach.
On that issue particularly.
On that issue, yes.
Right-wing, they're just, but, I need to be able to feel comfortable in a restroom.
But how do we handle this? I mean, I know this is beyond the scope of this conversation, but your 2 cents, is it about more education to demystify what a trans woman, that a trans woman is not necessarily threatening or a threat to your child or to your sports and the fairness aspect? What do we do to dispel this fear? What should be done?
I wish I knew. I mean, this is part of the reason I agreed to do on your podcast. I think, it's hard in a way. I think if you just exposure, if you know someone that's trans, you realize that these aren't these monsters under the bed. These are your neighbors. These are your colleagues. These are your friends. It's much harder to demonize someone that and
and it's also understand. It's like it's easy to demonize someone you don't understand.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's a question of allowing for that dialogue. And for me personally, I am personally interested in you as my friend and your journey, but it is also coming from a need to understand where this desire comes from and what happens if it doesn't find expression.
The desire for
your gender expression.
Yeah.
And there is just this desire to understand a whole life, a life choice. And for me, this is a classic case of intersection, because you are a migrant, you're American, but you are also trans in your adopted country. And you feel at home here today.
Yeah.
But I think we have to keep the dialogue going as a culture. Like you said, visibility is the aspect that I was looking for. The more visible you are, the more vocal you are of your experiences and in engagement with wider society, the more I think we will be closer to an understanding of each other.
I hope so, Surabhi. But I think, so obviously I want to be visible about this. Podcast. Of course, I have my concerns, my fears with that. But also, I think it's hard for me I feel some pressure. Like, I don't want to represent all trans people.
No.
Everyone's experience with that is unique.
Yes.
But then on the same time, when I do talk to other trans people, a lot of the experiences I've had, we share. By sharing this, like, you recognize that, that I've done this not because I'm a monster, I wanted to cheat at sports or go into women's spaces. It's because I am a woman, and it just was something I was compelled to do. It wasn't a choice in a way, but I'm also much happier in my life after this. Like, through my transition, it's really like I felt like I've removed a shell that was holding me in for a long time. Yeah. In translingo, they called it egg and an egg cracking, but yeah, that's what it feels like.
Well, on that note, I think it has been such a genuine and heartwarming and enlightening conversation. I certainly have got a lot of learnings and insights about your journey of transitioning, your gender, also your perspectives on two cultures, American and Danish, on two systems, your reflection on what this journey could have been in these two different settings, how it has actually been for you in your adopted country of Denmark, the little prices and sacrifices, little or more, that you've had to make in terms of shifting relationship dynamics, personally, socially, and work-wise. There is just so much to this life experience that has happened over the last 5-6 years. I'm truly grateful that you took the time to share in such depth this massive life experience and journey with me and with my audiences. I would love if my audiences take a moment to share what you think of this conversation and if it has impacted you or touched you in any way. I would definitely encourage you to subscribe to my channel and also subscribe to the podcast, the Decoding Diaspora Podcast. Allison Jay Sterling has been our lovely guest. I'm so very grateful to you, Allison, once more. Thank you for sharing yourself and your time with me. I truly hope that we will continue conversations around migrant experiences going forward. I promise to be back with more interesting guests like Allison and keep the conversation going on migrant, expat, and international experiences on this platform. Till I meet you again next time, please do take care of yourself. Remember to subscribe and share the podcast and take care of yourself. Bye-bye.